Alright, you guys seem to be enjoying these variety videos and I love making them, so thank you. Today I want to talk about a couple of my dark horse teams in each division for this upcoming season. Not dark horse Stanley Cup contenders, but dark horse teams in the way that maybe they surprise some people by being better than many thought they would be, or they make the playoffs and maybe make a bit of noise in them. First up, we're starting in the East with the Atlantic Division, Motor City. Now, this one's a bit of a cop-out because this team was as close as you can get to making the playoffs without actually making them. And with teams like Boston, Florida, Tampa, Toronto in this division, the Wings are probably going to be hovering around the wildcard picture again, but you're going to get Patrick Kane from the start of the season this time. Knock on wood, a healthy Dylan Larkin. Lucas Raymond shined last year. He looked great. DeBrincat's money in the bank, a reliable top 6 producer. Plus now you throw in Tarasenko into that top 6. I like that quite a bit. The defense obviously runs through Mo Seider, and I know he and Raymond need new deals, but that'll get sorted. Simon Edvinsson, the 6th overall pick from 2021 who had a cup of coffee in the NHL last year, he's looking like he might be ready to join the fold here, and if he is, that could be huge for this decor and by extension this team. I mean, he's a 6'6" Swedish left shot defenseman who went in the top 10 of the draft. Of course the Victor Hedman comparisons are going to be there. He's only 21, so nobody's expecting him to be the next Victor Hedman right now, but if he can just be a solid two-way everyday defenseman, that's a fat Hockey Town W. And then there's the crease where there are a few question marks. There is some uncertainty about the status of Ville Husso, but he is on the roster, and if there are injury concerns, they certainly aren't black and white. But then they went out and signed Cam Talbot and Jack Campbell in free agency, and don't forget Alex Lyon is also still on this team. Of course some of those names will be in the minors with Grand Rapids, but still that crease is crowded. Some might see that as a bad thing, but I actually think this could work out to their advantage. You ride the hot hand, whoever's winning you games, and you've got plenty of options to go through, whether veterans or younger guys. I didn't even mention Sebastian Cossa. I think the Wings could surprise this year. My other Atlantic team is the one that I keep falling for every year, thinking this is the year that they're finally going to be good. It's those pesky Sens. Now, they need a lot to go right. They need a big year from Stützle, Josh Norris to stay healthy, Jake Sanderson to shoulder the load as a number 1 defenseman, or at the very least share that responsibility with Thomas Chabot, and for the Ullmark addition to come up aces. And that's not even mentioning the fact that they'd probably need to be better than Buffalo, Detroit, Washington, Pittsburgh, the Islanders probably in order to snag one of those wildcard spots. But I just see a lot that I like about this lineup this year. That's a lethal top 6, dude. And I think Shane Pinto's a good enough player. He might even be part of this top 6 this year. But even if he isn't, I like that Perron addition. Whether he plays on the 3rd or 2nd line, he's still a solid player. And I know Ridley Gregg is thought of because of the slap shot into the empty net, but he's much more than that. He's developing nicely into a good middle 6 player. And if Sanderson can take another step and command that decor with Chabot, which they should be used to since they were both averaging over 23 minutes of ice time a night last year, I don't really mind that back end either. But to me, the single biggest key to them living up to this dark horse status, it's Linus Ullmark, no question. They were 7th worst last year in goals against, and you look at all the teams around them, most of them, except New Jersey and Detroit, were closer to winning the draft lottery than they were to making the playoffs, which is why they went out and got Ullmark. If he can just be good, doesn't have to be incredible, but just a good starting goalie, maybe steals you a few points here and there, but in general just holds down the fort. Just with that, I think the Sens would look completely different than they have in the past few years. Alright, over to the Metro. It was going to Pennsylvania either way, Philly or Pittsburgh. I really think Rutger McGroarty and Matvei Michkov are going to provide a big jolt for both these lineups. Ultimately, I decided to go with Pittsburgh. I've seen quite a few people write this team off already as they're not going to make the playoffs. Sid is wasting his time there. It's going to be 3 years in a row without playoffs. For me, I look at this lineup and it's like, not so fast. They had a fiery late season surge last year and almost got in. And especially the way Crosby, Malkin, Rust, and Bunting led the way on that run, the Penguins started looking good again. Carlson's there, Yad McGroarty, and I like some of the moves they made in the bottom 6, notably Cody Glass and Kevin Hayes. Of course, a huge question is what kind of goaltending can they get from Jari Nedeljkovic? But I think, look, Crosby's Crosby, Malkin's Malkin. If Bunting and McGroarty can be really good complementary pieces in that top 6, and honestly, I see nothing wrong with that bottom 6. It actually looks pretty good. I think this team can be good, even if Jari Nedeljkovic are just fine. I won't be surprised if Pittsburgh is back in the playoffs this year. And my other one for the Metro, I wonder about the new look Caps, man. I've seen quite a few people laughing about the Pierre-Luc Dubois acquisition, but if there's one thing I've seen from this guy, it's that he can just out of nowhere be good again and have a good season. They also added Andrew Mangiapane, who at worst can get you 15 to 18 goals, or at best he can just go off and be a top line goal scorer. He's probably not going to get 35 again, but he's a consistently good goal scorer, especially with a fresh start. Who knows? Dylan Strome's been really good for this team. Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre are developing well for them. They added Jacob Chikrin and Matt Roy to their decor. That's big. And maybe Charlie Lindgren can continue to prove that he's a legit starting goaltender in the NHL, and even if he can't, him and Logan Thompson is not a bad tandem. Then there's Ovi, who's a total wild card nowadays. Your guess is as good as mine what we're going to get from him this year. I feel pretty good in saying that he's still going to put up top line production though. I think this team could be sneaky good. Moving on to the Central Division now, I got the St. Louis Blues. Blues. Of course, the two highest profile acquisitions were that of Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg via offer sheet. And yes, that's part of why I put them here. They make the team better. Broberg's probably going to have to take on a significant top 4 role for this team, especially with the recent news of Torrey Krug being out for the year. And I think he's capable, especially with how he played in the playoffs for the Oilers. He seems ready to take that next step and take on a larger role. As for Holloway, he's probably going to start roughly around where he would have in the Oilers lineup with Evander Kane's injury, third line left wing. But especially after Edmonton signed Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson, Matt Savoy's part of that team now, I think it's going to be much easier for Holloway to get top 6 minutes in St. Louis than it would have been in Edmonton. He's a speedy, skilled, young forward with quite a bit of potential, and he's developing at a really nice rate. Whether he's a third or second line guy, I think he's going to make a pretty good impact, and I see him being a pretty significant part of the Blues' young forward core going forward. Speaking of which, yes, of course the Blues need big contributions from guys like Braden Shen, their captain, and Brandon Saad, but to me, up front, this team runs through Thomas, Kyrou, Neighbors, and Buchnevich. It'll go as they go, especially Thomas and Kyrou, and I think all 4 of them are ready to kick it up a notch as the lifeblood of this Blues offense. Then of course, between the pipes, Jordan Binnington is so important to this team, man. People like to think of the antics and what he does other than stopping the puck, but he had a really good year for this team last year, and he was probably the biggest reason they came kind of close to sniffing a playoff spot. There's no Carey Price, Marty Brodeur, Roberto Luongo for Team Canada at the Four Nations face-off this year. The goaltending's basically up in the air. It's open auditions for guys like Stuart Skinner, Aiden Hill, Sam Montembeault, and of course, Jordan Binnington. His GM, Doug Armstrong, is also the GM for Team Canada. I think he's going to be super motivated to play as well as he can to get the Canadian starting job, and I think the Blues are going to benefit from it. I also quite like the addition of both Joseph brothers, P.O. on D and Matthew up front. I like those moves. My other central pick is Utah. I think this team's going to be quite good. Ingram's a solid goalie who also might be in the running for a spot with Team Canada. Clayton Keller's an underrated superstar. Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther look like gems. I think they take a step this year, which really helps this team score more. And you're basically adding a number 1 defenseman in Mikhail Sergachev, or at the very least a really good number 2, and John Marino to round out pretty nicely that top 4 on D. Then there are a few wild cards sprinkled in there who could have a pretty big impact with this team and help them out a lot. I immediately think of Josh Doan. His NHL career started really nicely. Matthias Michelli is sneakily incredibly skilled. I could see him being up there with Liam O'Brien and Lawson Krause as under-the-radar fan favorites in their new market. And TJ Ginla in all likelihood will be sent back to Kelowna. He's going to be 18 for this whole NHL season, and this forward group already looks pretty good. But if he were to make the team, to me that's the ultimate wild card for Utah. And let's not forget, just in general, the juice, the excitement of a market that's just so pumped to have a new team. To go from a 5,000 seat arena to a brand new city, new state that's never had NHL hockey before, I think that's going to have a positive effect on the players, I do. And they already had a good foundation, a good core that they built on this offseason. I think this is going to be a team to watch out for this year. And lastly, the Pacific. I know this team's a popular pick for bounce back, so I'll move quickly through it. I think Seattle's going to be a whole lot better this year. I think Beniers rebounds and regains star form, which would be huge for them. I think Shane Wright takes on a full-time NHL role this year, which, insulated by guys like Chandler Stevenson and Yanni Gourde, again, huge for them. Like, I know they absolutely blew the bank open for Chandler Stevenson, but this center lineup is just sublime. Brandon Montour also just completely changes the complexion of this defense core. If Riker Evans can take a step and become an everyday NHL defenseman, this team's cooking with absolute gas back there. And I see no issue at all with Grubauer, Decord, and net. And of course, you can't forget about Jared McCann, who, for my money, until Beniers takes over, McCann is the main driver of this offense. I really like what I'm seeing out in Emerald City. And lastly, think of this one more as an honorable mention than a true dark horse, because I don't think this team's going to make the playoffs, much less be a contender to make some noise in them. I do think San Jose has the potential to surprise some people, and some teams for that matter, this year though. There's going to be growing pains with Celebrini, Smith, Eklund, Bordalo, Askarov. That's the way it goes with young players. You can't just expect them to step in and immediately be mature all-stars. But I also just think that all of a sudden, there's tons of crazy talent and high potential on the San Jose roster. And I think that's going to show itself just as much, if not more, than the growing pains. Now, there's a reason you don't fill a roster with 19 rookies. It wouldn't go well. It doesn't matter who the rookies are. But man, between the mix of high-flying young guys, budding players who are developing well, and the veterans they went out and got in the offseason, they don't look awful. Certainly not as bad as they were last year, far from it. They actually look like they're going to be quite fun. We talked exactly about what I think is going to make them exciting this year a couple of videos ago. You can check that out if you want. But especially if we start to see the beginning of a dynamic duo between Celebrini and Smith, whether it's on separate lines, a la Crosby and Malkin, or maybe it's together. Who do Eklund and Zetterlund find chemistry with? Because they're big parts of this too. And of course, seeing Askarov begin his development as a Sharks star goaltender is going to be fascinating. I think the new blood, new talent alone might produce a few more wins than some people might think. That'll do it for this one, guys. If you want more like this, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. You're awesome.